not only talking pyjamas today, but quite a serious question, actually, of when you should stop driving. When do you know? And is it something that you have got to wait for someone else to bring up in conversation? Or did you sit yourself down one day and say, actually, I shouldn't be driving anymore? And you make that really difficult decision yourself. Let me know if this has ever happened to you, if it's ever been a situation that you've been in. And although your instinct may say, well, that's older drivers, it could actually be linked to health. Now, the reason I'm asking is because there has been a rise in the number of people reporting concerns about somebody's driving to the DVLA. Figures obtained by the BBC show that between 2018 and last year, the number of fitness to drive notifications went from just under 22,000 to nearly 50,000. Well, our very own Ruth Bradley has been speaking to some of you in Shepton Mallet.
That's a really difficult one because there's so many people that pass their test and still can't drive. And there's so many people that are in their 30s, 40s, 50s and they still can't drive. My dad's in his 70s and he can still drive quite capably. Seen a lot of older people driving, so...
So it's not an age thing, actually, it's an ability thing.
I think there probably is an age issue, but I'd hope that by the time they get to that point, then something might have stopped them driving anyway. One thing that would improve people's use of the road is put them on a motorcycle. I think the motorcyclists tend to be better drivers because of their road awareness and they're used to using the road.
Literally, you should just get to a certain point where you have to take your test again. I don't think there should be a blanket ban on banning people at a certain age because some people can drive perfectly fine at 90.
Mental instability, I would think. Somebody who's got very slow reactions, that's horrendously dangerous.
Can you imagine a scenario where you might know someone who you think, not sure they should be on the road anymore?
There's a terrible question of whether you should stop them or not. Morally, yes, you should. Whether you would do it to your friend is a debatable point.
Could you know for yourself? We all hope we would know when we need to stop driving, don't we? But actually, I don't know if it's that simple.
Well, no, it's not. Yeah. Nobody wants to give up driving.
Of course they don't.
No.
It's freedom, and you live out in the middle of nowhere, virtually. You can't get to work, you can't go shopping, you can't go and visit anybody. At what point do you give up?
I do find this a really, really interesting topic. And actually, whilst Ruth was stopping some of you out and about in Shepton Mallet yesterday, she met James, who is from Bath. Now, James, at the age of 86, recently had his licence taken away after seeing a hospital consultant for a separate matter.
I thought it was premature because I'd forgotten where I parked my car. In this big hospital car. And I gave him the number plate and he called on his minions. So they went off scooting around and they found it. It wasn't that far away. The next step, he'd sent a letter to my GP. Hang up your keys.
Full interview from James and his wife, who you kind of heard from there, and daughter after 8 o'clock this morning. Well, listening to all of this is Rob Hurd from the Older Drivers Forum. Morning, Rob.
Good morning, Claire.
Let's talk the figures then. So we've got these fitness to drive notifications gone from just under 22,000 to nearly 50,000 since 2018. Is that a surprise?
It is a surprise, but in a way it's not, because we are talking about COVID in that situation, and we know that there's been a lot of people who weren't going to see their GP, so therefore weren't perhaps getting advice during that time. Family members hadn't been able to get to see them as regularly. So suddenly when we come out of COVID, people are managing to speak to their GP in person sometimes a bit more, but also families have been able to go and visit someone and maybe think, oh, mum, dad, or, a friend has actually deteriorated, and actually their driving might be now an issue. And that's why maybe all this is highlighted, more people being referred to the DVLA and therefore subsequent fitness to drive assessments being requested.
Does that show a more responsible society, or perhaps maybe an indication that the current licence system just isn't fit for purpose?
Well, I think all of us mustn't become complacent about our abilities. There are vast number of people who are very diligent, wanting to make sure that they're safe to drive. But there are those who stick their head in the sand, think they're perfectly fit to drive and continue driving, even though they may know they have an underlying condition that may affect their ability to drive. And in fact, there's about 286 conditions we should be telling the DVLA about, and only 15 are ever asked on licence application renewal. So therefore, people sometimes, it's that naivety not to know about it.
I'm thinking of James, who we heard there. Now, I'll be honest, I don't know the full ins and outs of James's situation. But, I've gone to a car park before and completely forgotten what level my car is on and couldn't find it for 15 minutes. That doesn't mean that I need to get one of these, fitness to drive notifications. Is there, quite a fine line here? And perhaps maybe more questions being asked about how those notifications are followed up?
Yeah, and I think the vast majority of older drivers are perfectly fit and healthy to drive on the road. We know that they have a wealth of experience, confidence and tolerance, but we do know as we age, our sight, hearing, reactions and judgment speed do deteriorate. And quite often, if we've got an underlying medical condition, that may make those issues even worse. So therefore, what we'd always say to people is, don't just accept and think, well, I'm just getting old. How about when you come in to renew your licence or apply for your driving licence, think about doing like we MOT our car every year. How about MOTing yourself? Go and check with a doctor. Is my health suitable for driving? Is the medication I'm on perfectly fit and healthy for that? Is my eyesight good? So go along and have regular eyesight tests. And then maybe brush up with a driving assessment from maybe a local voluntary group if you haven't got any medical conditions. But if you have a medical condition, then go to one of the many driving mobility centres across the country who can give you independent advice using experts cognitively and physically on your ability.
It's the fear, isn't it? It's the fear that somebody is going to say you are not allowed to drive. Who should have that authority once you have passed your test?
Well, ultimately, the authority deciding whether we're fit and healthy to drive, first point, legally sits on yourself. You have that legal responsibility to inform the DVLA. Even if the GP actually comes across a medical condition with you, ultimately it's your responsibility to inform them. However, if GPs or medical conditions or medical practitioners or opticians or even family members are concerned about someone's ability to drive, then everybody has the opportunity to inform the DVLA. They can do that directly, they can do it by email, phone call, or even anonymously as well. And what I would always say to people, don't leave it to chance. I mean, I set up the Older Drivers Forum because I used to be in the police for 30 years and 27 of them roads policing. And unfortunately, I dealt with a lot of collisions with older drivers and other age groups where people had medical conditions which made them no longer fit to drive. And unfortunately, that brought about a number of fatalities. So what I wanted to do is to help and support people. And that's why we have our website, olderdriversforum.com. And on there, we've got lots of help and support, not only for family and friends, but also older people as well, about how to continue driving safely for longer, but also when is the right time to retire from driving. Because we all age differently and we should be planning to retire in our later lives as we drive anyway. Because, we retire from work. We've got a plan for that. We retire from skiing when our knees pack up. So we should ultimately start having an ultimate plan about when is the right time to retire from driving.
Rob, great to speak. Thank you very much. Rob heard there from the Older Drivers Forum. A DVLA spokesperson has said it is the law that all drivers must ensure that they are medically fit to drive at all times when driving and notify the DVLA of the onset or worsening of a medical condition that could affect this. A Department of Transport spokesperson has said all drivers are already required to ensure that they are medically fit to drive, and all car drivers over 70 must renew their licence every 3 years. We have no plans to change the requirements for older drivers. Let me know your thoughts on this. 0800 678 1566. Tim in Fivehead, thanks for the message. Claire, I've noticed that around the Somerset villages, the driving, in my view, is appalling. It seems that the elderly are the guilty ones. Again, this is Tim's view. Their reactions are often slow, their eyesight isn't great, and they tend to go way below the speed limit, which can often be actually just as dangerous as speeding. I'd say that assessments should be made every couple of years from 60 to 65. That's slow, isn't it not? 60? If you're a 60-year-old driver out there, Do you think you should be having regular assessments? It would play a big role in safer roads. Perhaps if the public transport infrastructure was also better, then people would use the buses more. We will get to the buses in around about half an hour's time. But anything you'd like to add in, get in touch. 0800 678 1566. Thank you. Messages on driving. It was only a few moments ago, 15 minutes ago, we were talking about fitness to drive notifications going up since 2018. And actually having that conversation of when you should stop driving, is that something you can come to terms with yourself and you make the decision? Is it a conversation you need to have with a loved one? How does that go? Thank you for your comments. This from Ray in Bratton, who said, I wanted to point something out. Drivers going below the speed limit, this is in reference to what Tim in Fivehead said, doesn't make them a bad driver. It's the speed limit, not the speed that they have to do. They shouldn't be condemned for driving slowly. And Andrew in Taunton says, I'm 66 years of age, and I would say my driving is as good as many younger drivers out there. If I had a competition with a younger driver, I'm pretty sure, actually, I would win on the highway code as well as the driving aspect. 0800 678 1566. Thank you for your comments on fitness to drive. How fit are you to drive your car? And how often do you think about it? And when do you reach that stage where you sit down and you say to yourself, should I still be behind a wheel? We've been looking at numbers reported by the DVLA, and they've been obtained by the BBC, that show between 2018 and last year, the number of fitness to drive notifications went from just under 22,000 to nearly 50,000. So it begs the question, okay, if more people are noticing it, reporting it, they're getting these notifications, is that the system working? Or does it show we just have an awful lot of people driving on the roads who shouldn't be? I don't necessarily think this is 100% about older drivers. I think this can bring in your health. And that was the subject on which I had to have the conversation with my parents. It must have been 2011 or 2012. I vividly remember Dad taking me to a railway station with Mum because we were going into London, and I was terrified. He had diabetes, and one of the effects was his feet went numb. He lost the feeling in his feet. And I just remember thinking, you cannot feel the pedals properly. You cannot, clutch and accelerator is just not working anymore. And I was terrified, but more, I was worried for other people on the road as well. And I remember I got on that train with Mum and I said, I'm not going to rest until I know he's back home. So I was constantly ringing to find, are you back? And then we had that conversation of, we just don't think you should be driving anymore. I mean, he must have been 65. He wasn't old, but he just, health-wise, it wasn't right. And he looked so sad because he knew that this was independence gone. It was a large part of his life that enabled him to do things that he wouldn't be able to do anymore. And that was heartbreaking, but it needed to be done for everybody's safety. Thanks to Tony, who says, we live in a rural area where driving is a necessity. Many of our neighbours are 75 plus and are far better drivers than many young drivers. The worst drivers we experience on our county roads, mums on the school run. God, there's going to be quite a lot, I think, of arrows pointing in many directions here. So for Tony, he's saying mums on the school run, inconsiderate parking, speeding, not giving way when required on traffic calming points. I know earlier on lots of people were saying it's the older drivers who drive too slow that cause a lot of problems. Brenda in Wellington says, Claire, hi, so good to have you back. Thank you, Brenda. My husband should have given up driving much sooner than he did. What swung it was that his licence expired, and he knew really that he wasn't fit to have it renewed. As for the chap who complains about slow drivers in villages, I wonder what speed he thinks is appropriate in Somerset's narrow lanes when it's possible to round a corner and come upon a walker, a cyclist, a horse. Slower is safer. However irritating he finds it. Brenda in Wellington, thank you. Keep your messages coming through. 0800 678 1566. You can WhatsApp 08000 321 333. Start that message with the word Somerset. On to the subject of pyjamas. I'm terrified now somebody's going to send me a fitness to drive notification if they catch me driving in my pyjamas. We'll get back to that conversation shortly. But continuing on the roads, we've been getting reports from bus users that parts of the county are still seeing real issues with last-minute cancellations or buses just not showing. When it is you should stop driving, when you know And that whole idea around your fitness to drive. Thank you for all of your messages. Stuart and Ashcott said, Claire, I have had a similar situation and a conversation with my mother as you did with your father. She was 89 when she stopped. I have a large goods vehicle licence. And when you reach 65, you have to have a medical every year to pass to high standards. Lack of concentration is probably more likely to be an issue than age, from what I can see on the roads. Well, we're talking about this because figures obtained by the BBC show that between 2018 and last year, the number of fitness to drive notifications went from just under 22,000 to nearly 50,000. Shaps, who is a first-timer, thanks very much. To all the drivers frustrated behind slower drivers, as has been mentioned, just leave earlier and you won't be under the time pressures that result in your speeding. It's a limit. It is not a target. Also had a note from Kiwi, who is in Shapwick. Morning to you.
Good morning.
Thanks so much for being on the show. Talk me through how all of this affects you, because I know this may cover older drivers as a subject, but it also does look at illnesses and disorders. And I know you've got fibromyalgia, haven't you?
Yeah. What I've found is that over time, I've struggled, like with concentrating and things like that. I've gone to an automatic, which has made a big difference. But I have days where my pain levels can be really high, and I have days of fibro fog where I'm just not focusing very well. I know I feel a bit vague and head in the clouds, and I won't drive on those days, especially if it's somewhere that I don't know, because I know that my reactions are slower and that I'm not, like, I struggle to stay focused on what I'm doing and what surrounds me and that sort of thing. And I don't think it's safe for me or for other people. And it's interesting, I think, when I've been driving, like I've had to get home when I know I'm not doing so well and things like that. And I know I drove slower. I'll sort of realise that I'm not at the speed limit. And I've sat there before and thought, I wonder if this is why older people drive slow, or slower, because you're aware that you're not reacting as quickly. So you tend to adjust your driving so that you know you've got that time to react.
Many people might say, well, if you know your reactions aren't perhaps where they should be, should you be on the road?
Yeah, and like I say, that's why I would generally choose not to drive. If I've got to get home from work or something like that, I know the roads and I know that I'm pretty safe on those ones. But, yeah, when I know I'm reacting slower, I don't drive simply for that reason, because I think it's hard, the thing of people going slow, because if they're going well below the limit, but you can't pass them, it does get really frustrating. But if they speed up, then they could be more dangerous. Yeah. But I think you do need to really think about it. And I've thought about it for me in the future, like when would I stop driving? Because eventually it's going to be age and fibro that I'm fighting against.
Is there, I mean, you've obviously got a diagnosis. Has there ever been anybody, medical professional or otherwise, who have said, well, given how we know fibromyalgia can affect you, you shouldn't be driving at all?
No.
So it is, you take it on as your responsibility?
Yeah, I mean, usually, like, if we're going out as a family, I'll usually navigate and my husband will drive, because then I don't have to be focusing on all the little things. I just have to remember which way's left and which way's right, because I get that wrong all the time. Yeah. I'm going, take a left, and pointing right.
We've all been guilty of that. Kiwi, thank you so much for sharing your story. I really appreciate it. Kiwi in Shapwick there, who has fibromyalgia, but knows good days versus bad, when she should be on the road and perhaps not. Dumper Mark says, Claire, the problem of older drivers driving too slow is a dangerous one, in my opinion. I was stuck behind somebody last week on a major A road doing 35 in a 60. There were people overtaking him on double solid white lines. When I went past, I saw He was leant right over the steering wheel trying to see where he was going. This is not an uncommon occurrence around the county. Sally in Pilton says, Claire, having to work until the age of 66, possibly older in the future, people need their cars, especially if they live in rural areas. My nearest bus stop is a quarter mile from my house. To get to work, even if I could get a bus, I'd have to change buses to get there. My own vehicle is more convenient and comfortable, and if I need to pop into town on the way home, of course I can. I'm 800 678 1566 of the statistics.
It is a surprise, but it's in a way it's not, because we are talking about COVID in that situation, and we know that there's been a lot of people who weren't going to see their GP, so therefore weren't perhaps getting advice during that time. Family members hadn't been able to get to see them as regularly. So suddenly when we come out of COVID, people are managing to speak to their GP in person sometimes a bit more, but also families have been able to go and visit someone and maybe think, oh, mum, dad, or, you know, a friend has actually deteriorated, and actually their driving might be now an issue. And that's why maybe all this is highlighted, more people being referred to the DVLA, and therefore subsequent fitness to drive assessments being requested.
Does that show a more responsible society, or perhaps maybe an indication that the current licence system just isn't fit for purpose?
Well, I think all of us mustn't become complacent about our abilities. There are a vast number of people who are very diligent, wanting to make sure that they're safe to drive. But there are those who stick their head in the sand, think they're perfectly fit to drive and continue driving, even though they may know they have an underlying condition that may affect their ability to drive. And in fact, there's about 286 conditions we should be telling the DVLA about, and only 15 are ever asked on licence application renewal. So therefore, people sometimes, it's that naivety not to know about it.
Well, somebody who recently had to give up their licence is James from Bath after he went to see a consultant for a separate matter. He and his wife, their daughter, they were out in Shepton Mallet yesterday, spoke to our reporter Ruth Bradley.
I thought it was premature because I'd forgotten where I'd parked my car in this big hospital car. And when he'd finished with me, and he said, you can go now. And I said, I've forgotten where I parked my car.
Which can happen to a lot of us sometimes.
Well, it was a huge car. So I said, oh, I'm sorry, but I can't remember where I put my car. And I gave him the number plate, and he called on his minions. So they went off scooting around, and they found it. It wasn't that far away. The next step, he'd sent a letter to my GP. Hang up your keys.
So the letter was not great, was it? But then I emailed him, and he came and spoke to you in person. And he was quite nice then. He was sweet and thoughtful, and said he realised how hard it was. And he didn't say you had to immediately stop, but because you're 86 now, and he said there's a kind of protocol where you have to go through an assessment to make sure you can still keep. But you decided not to do it, Dad. You could have done that.
I suppose, but it also coincided with Bath being insistent on stopping elderly drivers.
Oh, the rules about the blue badges and this ring of steel and all that stuff. Yeah. So it just, a number of factors meant it was possibly the right time, even though you wouldn't have started that process to hang up your keys, as they put it. But has it meant a change of lifestyle for you, or have you got a chauffeur, perhaps? No.
Me?
Okay, yeah.
My brother to drive, but I had a stroke, and I thought, that could have happened while I was driving, so I'm not going to drive anymore.
Yeah.
And I'd never have forgiven myself if I hadn't hit somebody, caused an accident. So,
And so for you guys as a family, it has meant adjustments then?
Family help us, but they're busy people.
It's a mindset thing. You phone a cab, you save money on having a car. But it is a different thing. It's an organisational shift.
And do you mind me just talking about you for a moment and just asking your daughter, had you sort of seen this coming or thought this for yourself, or was it more that once the doctor said it, you thought, I can see that? See how honest you want to be. I can be diplomatic here.
No, I thought Dad was just on the edge. I thought he could have carried on a bit longer, but I wasn't 100% sure. Yeah, he could have carried on a bit longer, but you were doing things like going quite fast.
It's just I'm leaving my hat behind. I forgot my walking stick today. It's just old age, isn't it?
Yeah.
I say not having a car when you've been used to it shrinks your life. Because, I mean, a lot of our friends are not on bus routes.
Yeah.
And so we can't maintain contact like we used to, just on the phone.
But do you know what I think it has to bring about, actually, is you feeling completely able to ask people that you've spent your life helping to do something for you.
If any of this is ringing any bells for you, conversations that you may have had, situations you've been in, let me know. 0800 678 1566. The DVLA has said that it is the law that all drivers must ensure that they are medically fit to drive at all times when driving, and notify the DVLA of the onset or worsening of a medical condition that obviously could affect this. The Department for Transport basically backing that up, saying all drivers are already required to ensure that they're medically fit. They reiterate over 70s must renew their licence every 3 years, and at the moment they have no plans to change the requirements.